Good evening and welcome to Overview and Scrutiny Performance and Growth. Welcome everyone, it's nice to see you. This is the first meeting of the new year. Before we start, I'd like to offer my thanks to my ex-Vice Chair, Councillor Howell, who has actually been promoted to Cabinet, and I wish her well and look forward to a new Vice Chair in the coming months. Without further ado, let's start.
On that point, Chair, why are we not electing a Vice Chairman at this meeting? Surely under the Constitution, we should be selecting as soon as the old one has resigned.
It's been moved to the March agenda because the appointment to the panel to fill the vacancy will be made at the February council meeting, and then it was felt that we would appoint a Vice Chair once you had a full complement.
I'm sorry, that wasn't run through anyone, through us. Surely it should be at the first meeting from when the person resigns. That's what's happened on other panels when there hasn't been a full complement. So I don't know why we're any different on this panel.
That was my understanding, the direction we were given, that would be taken from the March one. But if you like, I can pause and just check through the details now for you.
Yeah, if you can check through the details, please.
I have it in the Constitution that it's if there is both the Chair and the Vice Chair are absent from a meeting, that you can elect somebody to take place for that. But my understanding was that obviously because we'll be elected, an appointment will be made at February Council, an election will take place after that.
Well, just within the Constitution, it just says that the Chairman and the Vice Chair of Overview and Scrutiny panels will be drawn from amongst the councillors sitting on the panel. So we are still all sitting on this panel as far as I'm concerned, so we should be selecting tonight. Otherwise, is this panel then not constituted because we do not have a Vice Chairman?
In order to expedite things, I don't think for one meeting it's going to be too much of a problem.
I think, if I may, Chair, I think there does seem to be a bit of a disconnect, shall we say, between the two aspects of our constitution. It does, as Councillor Martin say, that that effectively the panel shall appoint such persons it's considered to be appropriate as Chair and Vice Chair selected from the panel. So we could, if we wanted to, select a Vice Chair for this meeting for the purposes of this meeting only, pending further decisions. But in terms of the overriding element of the Constitution, the only requirement is for the meeting to be quorate is that we have a Chair. In this case, we've got a Chair. We don't have to necessarily have a Vice Chair in terms of another section of the Constitution. So there does appear to be a disconnect there, Councillor Martin, but I don't think there's a problem with us electing a Chair for this particular meeting for tonight to cover the temporary arrangements.
Yes, that's what I'd like to do. And I think behind the scenes, it'd be worth speaking to Tom to try and get some clarification, because from my understanding, a committee can only be constituted, or a panel can only be constituted if you have an elected a chairman and vice chairman. Otherwise, it would be just useful to get that clarification from Tom.
Sorry, Suzanne just said.
As one of the statutory officers present, I'm happy to take that away and talk to Tom. My understanding is you don't actually need a vice chair when your chair is present. The purpose of a vice chair is to sit in the chair in the absence of a chair. It doesn't affect the constitution of the panel or its quoracy, as Mike said earlier. So I believe you can do it. You could. I personally wouldn't advise you. You should elect for one meeting. You either elect a vice chair or you don't, and you're not in quorate if you don't have a vice chair.
I therefore propose that we elect a vice chairman who can be removed at any point in the future if that's the committee's wish, and therefore I'd like to propose Councillor Gardner.
I'd like to propose Councillor Wells.
Do I have a second for the proposal of Councillor Gardner in the first instance? Councillor Jennings, and is there a second of the proposal of Councillor Wells? Councillor Blackwell and Councillor Campbell.
Yes.
Are there any other nominations before we move forward with taking a vote on that? No? If I could have a show of hands for those in favour of Councillor Gardner being elected Vice Chair. 3. And for those in favour of Councillor Wells being elected Vice Chair. Thank you. So that's 4 in favour of Councillor Wells and 3 for Councillor Gardner. So therefore, Councillor Wells, if you'd like to join us.
Okay, I think we can resume the meeting. Apologies.
So we have apologies this evening from Councillor Chapman and Councillor Terry, and we also have apologies for a potential late arrival for Councillor Corney.
Minutes of last meeting.
So within the pack you have the minutes of the last meeting on the 4th of December. Is everybody happy if the chair signs those, or is there any comments or amends? Is everyone happy for those to be signed? Yes?
Item 2, members' interests.
Does any member have any interest to declare for any of the items on tonight's agenda? No?
Thank you. Item 3, overview and scrutiny work programme.
So within your pack you have the work programme and the notice of key decisions. As part of the planning session that you had recently, it was agreed that you would discuss the items on the work programme on page 11 of your agenda pack to see whether you would wish to see those all coming through to the agendas in full for the meetings, or whether you're happy for some of those to be seen either in another way or that you feel that they're not necessary. And you've had a synopsis of each item sent round to you via email. Is there any initial comments, or would you like me to run through each report on there to sort of make a decision as a group as to whether you would like to see those going forward?
Comments? Motion.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the 5th of March meeting, I would like to see all 3 come to us especially the Market Towns programme, but I think the corporate performance is something that has to come to us anyway. In regards to the Q3 finances, I know that we all originally discussed that going to the next meeting. Considering we're looking at it as part of the budget, I'm pretty much comfortable that doesn't come to the March meeting and extends the life of that meeting, or needing officers to come back for that. But obviously we do want to see the Q4 outturn at the end of the year. In regards to everything else, corporate plan update, definitely. Community infrastructure levy, definitely. Economic growth, 100%. And I would like to revisit the market towns nearer the time when we know where we are with the spring update. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Was that in terms on the market town, in terms of lessons learned? I think we discussed that briefly.
Ideally, if we can have that come to us at some stage, definitely. But I know this is just one of the normal programmed updates, unless Mike tells us differently.
Through yourself, Chair. Those are the normal programmed updates at the moment. The Market Towns Lessons Learnt is one of the topics that's part of the other topics that we gathered up following our recent session. So it is something we're aware of and we'll bring through at the appropriate time.
Any other comments? Councillor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I was just wondering if we were going, it's not stated there, but I wondered if we were going to bring to the panel the outcomes of the local plan engagement, which we have had, well, I have had quite a few complaints with the way the system goes. So I would rather see that coming sooner than later to the panel, because if we're going out again, I think we need to have made sure we've rectified those issues before we go out to the public again.
Through yourself, Chair. Absolutely. Again, it's one of those topics that we've got on the long list, let's call it that we're, myself and John will be working through with Democratic Services. And the team are frantically working through the comments and the array of comments that we've got on the local plan. So we'd like to do that before we kind of have that session, so we can give you the full picture of the several thousand comments that we received through that process as part of kind of the lessons learned and review of where we go next as well.
Thank you. Any other comments there? Oh, Councillor Catman.
Just to say, I'd be happy that it's kind of been said, but the Great Staunton Neighbourhood Plan doesn't need to come to us, I don't feel.
Sorry, can you just clarify?
Great Staunton.
Oh.
Yes, Neighbourhood Plan is on the agenda for June. And I wasn't sure that we really need to see that.
If I can just add some colour to that, in terms of that process, as you know, a neighbourhood plan is something that's developed by the community. Once we've got the inspector's view on the examination, it's then for us effectively to, or for the executive to effectively ratify that plan can then go out to referendum. And then obviously once it's gone through that referendum, if it is then supported by the community, it's then down to the executive to make the final decision on it. So that just gives the context for that.
Agreed. So historically, of course, we've always seen the neighbourhood plans. So, sorry, Councillor Gardner.
I think on the neighbourhood plans, I do think it should come to this panel. All the others have, so then if we've got any queries, we can bring them up at that. And I think as a local member to Great Staunton, I think it should come to this panel. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Pickering.
I was just going to say that so far we're saying everything should continue to come to us, which somehow is counter to what we've been saying in previous meetings. So I don't disagree that, you know, that all these things are important, but if we're going to make a change to the way that we do our business, then we're going to have to draw the line somewhere. So that's just a comment. And for my money, the neighbourhood plan would be one that, you know, I feel in the past we haven't added a huge amount of value to when they've come through us, even though it's clearly an important document for that area. I don't feel that this panel is going to add a lot of relevant information to that particular item.
Thank you for that. Mike, can I just get some clarification? Is there a need for it to come to ONS specifically?
The short answer is no. It's obviously there because it goes through the pre-decision approach that this council has operated. It is part of the decision-making pathway to go to the executive to then take that, to authorise the neighbourhood plan to take the next steps. There's pros and cons I can see from both sides. We've had the discussion as part of the training, etc., to try and reduce the workload, shall we say, for the panel. But I do recognise Councillor Gardner's counterpoints, which are all the previous ones have kind of gone through the process. It's that where do you draw the line? As Councillor Pickering quite eloquently said, if it gives Councillor Gardner any comfort, then obviously we can ensure that the relevant officers are engaging with yourself before the reports, etc., are finalised, so that you understand what the decision is that will then be going on to Cabinet to be made, if that would give you that comfort as a local member and any other local members for that area, as opposed to them coming through scrutiny. But again, it's ultimately for members to decide.
Councillor Gardner.
I do think, as a local member, then we do need to be informed as to what the decision is going forward. That is why I think it should be coming to this panel, so that the local member is aware of what's going on, and it's the process we've always adopted. I don't think, looking at those particular work programme there, that they're that onerous into what we've had previously. My own opinion, but we seem to have cut that down quite considerably. So I would be quite happy to leave that there going forward, and I think neighbourhood plans should come, not just because it's within, I'm the elected representative for that particular village. I think they should all come here, as that's been the process in the past. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered whether there was a sort of a halfway point, because these aren't super time, they're not as time sensitive as some of the other reports that come through, because they still need to go through further stages of referenda, etc. Whether the neighbourhood plans could be circulated to this panel in advance of the meeting date being set, and if any member of the panel wants to bring it to the scrutiny, then they'd still have that opportunity to do so.
It's a thought. Councillor Pickering.
I was going to say something similar, actually, that, perhaps only if there was something controversial about the report, or it was likely the recommendation was to, reject the plan or something like that, that it should come to the panel on that basis. But if all is well with the plan and it's, going smoothly through the process, it doesn't seem like we're going to add a lot of value to it.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy if members are that, given that we're looking at programming this for June, we've got a few months to kind of work this through and work out, where we're heading in this. So let me go back to the team and take some steer, and we can engage with yourself, Councillor Gardner, as local members, and Councillor Corley, as well, to make sure you're satisfied in terms of direction of travel, etc., etc. And then again, we can look at how we might engage with the panel and through yourself, Chair. So if I can take that one away.
Of course. I think that's eminently sensible, because I don't think we're actually going to come to a conclusion tonight. Councillor Wells.
Yeah, I was just going to briefly make the point that we need to be even-handed, because there were some neighbourhood plans which affect members of this committee and some which don't, and probably most of them won't actually. So we need to be sure that we are dealing with them in the same manner, whether or not there is a representative of that community on this committee. Thank you.
I think that's fine. So I'll leave that with you, Mike. Thank you. Okay. We'll move on to item 4, questions arising from previous meetings.
So you have in the pack the questions, so that should bring all of the outstanding questions up to date. If there's any questions on that, if not, we'll obviously continue to move that on as questions arrive during sort of future meetings.
Okay. Okay, everyone all right with that? I'd like to move on to item 5, which is our revenue budget.
Good evening, everyone. I am delighted that I have the subject matter experts in the room with me for this particular evening, because this is the one where, even with the subject matter experts, sometimes you're not quite sure what some of the detail is, because there is so much of it. What we'll do is Suzanne will run through with an overview, and then we're very keen to hear questions, feedback, comments, and so on as to the budget and MTFS. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Obviously, the papers before you are the proposed revenue budget. There's capital in there as well in terms of the capital programme in the MTFS pack. And this budget has been prepared relying on a number of things. Firstly, the provisional local government finance settlement, because actually the final one was only published on Monday, therefore was after this, and I'll return to make some comments on each of these. It relies on the forecast outturn for 24-25 based on the Q3 outturn, and I'm grateful for Councillor Martin's comments about that. And it also includes the decision of Council in December 2024 to set aside some of the projected underspending year for the Community Wealth Building Fund. So those have all been taken into account, and also relies on the budget planning principles agreed by the Council in December 2022. I've just said the final settlement was announced on Monday in Parliament by way of a written paper, and that represents no real significant change for districts, of which obviously Huntingdonshire is one. You may have read that some additional monies were made available to cover increases in special levies relating to internal drainage boards, but that, if anything, will be marginal to us. It won't affect the overall budget, and as yet, not exactly sure. But last year, when that occurred, the majority of it was in the Lincolnshire area rather than closer to home. Clearly, we'll work our way through those detailed settlement figures, and if there's any minor amends to go into the papers, that will be done after Cabinet next week and in preparation for the Council meeting on the 26th of February. The forecast outturn for 24-25 still projects a further underspend, which is on page 153 of your paper pack. Normal practice at the year end, where an underspend arises, is for the Section 151 officer to put that into general reserves for future use. However, you might see in that paper that given that local government review has been announced, it's my view that it's prudent to set up a reserve in the region of £1 million to support additional work that will be required to prepare for that eventuality, rather than put it in general fund reserves and then move it around at a later point. As yet, there are no firm proposals, only the assumption based on experience of other places that there will be additional work to be done. Not sure what that will look like, the quantum or the value. Clearly, where existing resources can cover that work because it takes a priority or whatever else, that will be the first call. But I want to set that reserve aside to offer some assurance to the Council that we will be able to support the work that's needed to prepare for the future. The only thing I would say is clearly the budget planning principles, reviewed those and they haven't been superseded, and they still have merit in my view, given that there remains uncertainty in the future funding of local government as a whole, and indeed we only have a formal 1-year settlement, so we are still in some of those uncertainties. I hope I don't need to remind you that there's a legal requirement to set a balanced budget for the forthcoming year, and these revenue budget proposals do that with a small draw from the earmarked reserves. That includes taking account of the impact of the changes to national insurance contributions and the changes of the ceilings and things various, all of which have been factored into the budget. That does leave us with a net cost, as the compensation within the finance settlement didn't match the impact that we estimate, and that goes across the local government sector and was indeed raised as part of the feedback to the provisional settlement by all different types of councils, districts, county and unitaries. The MTFS is set out for the next 5 years, and I think we all recognise that in latter years that strategy may well change depending on what comes down the track in the next 2 to 3 years. On page 74 of your pack, I have set out the statement that I'm required to make under section 25, it's called, on the robustness of the budget and the adequacy of reserves. I feel fortunate that this council has a sound financial footing, not like the majority of district councils across the country, and we therefore, as a council, are in a position to withstand some of those financial challenges and uncertainties that I mentioned a short while ago. Taking account of the revenue budget, the proposed capital programme and the impact that has on the revenue budget in terms of the minimum revenue provision and other associated costs, the modest use of earmarked reserves and the income from the variety of sources at our disposal, including the commercial investment portfolio, fees and charges and council tax, I have satisfaction that there has been rigour in the development of the proposals. The individual budget proposals that are not deemed to be unavoidable pressures are set out in Annex A, which is page 83, and hopefully that will give you a little more detail. In relation to quarter three, whilst I recognise and I'm grateful for the panel's indulgence to deal with that this evening, if there were any questions that councillors wish to send us in writing, then we would undertake to respond to those to all the members of the panel, because it should be appropriate that all questions and all answers would be shared about. So I leave that as an open invitation. And with that, I do have colleagues in the background as well who have a lot more of the detail at their fingertips or knowledge. So I commend the paper to the panel for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I think we do appreciate the amount of work that you've actually had to do in a very short period of time. So I want to thank the team for all that work. At which point I'll open the floor for questions. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. And firstly, thank you to Suzanne for meeting us earlier in the week to discuss the budget in our role as opposition. And a big thank you to Suzanne, Sharon and the rest of the team for all the work they've done as part of this budget. I know it takes a lot of work, and Suzanne only recently joining the council. It's probably been a huge undertaking in that time. So thank you very much for all the time that you've put in to pulling this together for us. Not planning on discussing anything particular within figures within the budget. A question for you. You mentioned the provisional local government settlement was only released on Monday, and I believe I saw it was discussed in Westminster today. Has that changed significantly or otherwise? Anything within the papers that we're seeing? Has there been an increase in income or a decrease in income that we should be aware of?
Thank you, Councillor Martin. The final local government settlement was on Monday, not the provisional one. We had that back in December. It was the final one, and there's nothing significant for district councils. There's no announcement similar to last year where there was a chunk of money. As I alluded to in my introduction, there was some additional money for councils where they're facing significant increases in the levies from internal drainage boards, but that detail hasn't filtered its way through as yet, partly because, as you say, it was discussed today, and as a consequence, but my best knowledge of comparing it back to last year's, the majority of that additional funding went into the Lincolnshire authorities rather than ourselves, even though Huntingdonshire has been part of the special interest group. There may be a small amount, but it will not make a material difference, in my view, to the funding that we have used in preparing these papers.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. You'll be pleased to know mine aren't going to be detailed number questions either. So, my question is really towards the Executive Council, actually. And this is your third budget that you've brought since the Joint Administration has come in. I'd be interested to know, has the way that you approach it from the executive, the budget setting process, has it changed over those 3 years? Clearly, this is the first time with Suzanne rather than the previous Section 151 officer. And I'd also be interested to know how much input and drive is coming from the executive towards the budget setting process as opposed to from officers, and how the process of looking at the bids that come in is managed between who's making those calls, and what's the process that they go through?
So it's fair to say the process has changed. In essence, the day the new budget takes effect, this time last year, we started the planning for the budget this time round. I think we've probably been a little bit more decentralised. So in essence, there is more onus on the officers to work with their executive councillors in order to have those discussions, see what they think is coming out for the year, the pressures that are arriving, the opportunities, the budget bids to do new things that will either be cost savings or new initiatives. Those run through a process that Karen put into place a couple of years ago now, just around reviewing suggested projects, making sure that there's some rigour there, letting the senior management team see those. The conversations I had with the executive councillors at that point. Personally, I don't get involved in that side of things. I think it's important that I'm doing the governance role and I'm making sure that the ducks are in a row and things are being done robustly, but it isn't up to me where money should be spent. I think it's very much down to portfolio holders and then broader cabinet to be making those decisions. I think it then becomes a conversation with Section 151 officer around the legalities of the spend. Is the money there to be spent? Is it able to be done so? Are we following the correct processes and so on? And it's up to me to make sure that the governance has been run through, that people are happy with things where that have been suggested, that there is a robustness to that, and the alternatives have been considered. And that just continues, that process has continued over the course of the year. We then will do the quarterly meetings, which allow us to see, is there going to be spare money there? Are there pressures coming out? Are there surprises that are going to arrive that are going to change some of those assumptions that we've made? We have, I hope we're having a good regular cadence of meetings as well, although we did miss last time round due to diary pressures. So I hope again that that's giving a greater level of transparency. I think we've changed elements of the report as well. We've tried to put more information in, but without drowning people in data. And we've also tried to be more open with the commercial investment strategy where that property portfolio is. And we had the closed session recently, didn't we, just to run through that so that everybody's got a good sound understanding. So, yes, I think we've matured the process. Are there opportunities for greater transparency or the ability to dive into certain things in a slightly different way? Yes. We've been having some discussions just around are there some options that perhaps running through overview and scrutiny might give a little bit more awareness or input into some of those decisions. And to be fair, the 15th of December has thrown such a huge curveball for everyone that there is a little bit of a question mark as to, is that going to be a good use of time, considering I think all members across the entire chamber are going to find themselves diverted by the impacts and the considerations of what the devolution in the unitaries will mean to us. So I think we've got some interesting conversation subjects over the course of the next couple of months. We need some more information from government, I think. But if the pressures on that side are lower than expected, then I would hope that we can have a good conversation about how we can continue to improve the budget setting process.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Blackwell.
Thank you, Chair. Just two, if I may. You mentioned the portfolio holder mentioned the commercial investment or commercial estates, and there is one line that says Stonehill is not generating income due to damage. Just wondered if we could receive an update on the position of that unit, but obviously if it's not available now, I totally respect that. Thank you. did you want to come on that now? Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Blackwell. I think that's in the Q3 paper. That property is being looked at for being repaired as it needs to be, and then it will go back onto the market to look for a tenant. So that's where we are with that at the moment. And obviously, because it's in disrepair at the moment due to its circumstances, we therefore can't have someone in, so it's not generating as income. So we're going through that process at the moment, and the estates team are actively managing that. So that's partly why there's a lower income from commercial the property portfolio this time, but we're hoping to have it back in use for next financial year, hence why we're assuming that we'll go back to a higher level of income through the commercial investment portfolio. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. And then one final point was on parking charges and the provision to increase. And looking at the timescales, this appears to be after what should be the successful introduction of CPE, which may, on the back of that, drive increased usage of our facilities. It's just a point on that, or whether this is a provision, obviously, that we've built into the paper, or are there other options we can consider, and perhaps a wholesale parking review by the services team? Thank you.
Happy to take that one. It's important when you're planning the budget to obviously take account of future proposals as well. You'll see that's only for a part year, and perhaps the Executive Councillor can add some weight to that. So parking is always a difficult one to predict because of all sorts of different behaviours that come into play of members of the public. And obviously the introduction of CPE will put a different dynamic on the use of car parking as well. So the fact that it's not suggesting it's from the 1st of April does give the opportunity for some work to be done to look at that in a wider sense. But the current proposal is that adding modest inflationary increase to that, along with all the other fees and charges that we are reliant on as part of our income, is a prudent approach. But if it doesn't come to bear in that way, or things dramatically change through CPE, we will deal with that from a financial accounting point of view and a management accounting point of view as an in-year finance issue. As regards to a bit more on the approach to that, I think the Executive Council can probably add something to that.
So I think it's important to remember that a budget is an attempt to look into a crystal ball and predict the year ahead from a finance point of view. A budget is never going to consider strategy across different areas of different portfolios. What it would do is respond to the inputs from the other parts of the council, take certain assumptions and play those back from a financial point of view. So those charges have gone in purely as a financial point from the inflationary increase. You're right. What will CPE bring? Good question. What will the behaviours bring? One of the interesting debates around car parking is that actually sometimes you have to charge car parking to dissuade people from parking because there aren't enough spaces, and in order to gain footfall, you need dwell times to be lower so that people get out of the way so that other visitors can come in, which seems a little bit counterintuitive, but walking around Huntingdon at the weekend and seeing people who are not paying attention to the road markings as they are at the moment, it is possible that will be the case. So if the panel or if the Executive Councillor in charge brings forward a different strategy or brings forward options for that particular item that change the perspective of what happens, or that introduces greater detail into the outputs from CPE, because of course we're still waiting for the time in Westminster, and goodness only knows whether that will come along. Then absolutely the budget would just be amended accordingly.
Thank you for the clarification. Obviously, as someone from a market town, obviously parking is I'm sure you're aware, hugely contentious. So I think we would welcome any further review or strategy in terms of moving forward with parking for the whole of the district as we move forward. Are there any other questions? Oh, Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. My other question really sort of straddles this report and the next report really, but it does relate to a budget item if I may bring it up now. And that's really just to understand from probably the Section 151 officer what the underlying assumptions are within the budget on perhaps inflation, wage growth, and then particularly what is the assumed interest rates and whether they are the same assumptions that Oliver has in the paper from whatever the next number agenda item is.
We have assumed, as far as wage growth is it 2 or 4? 4%, sorry. My brain hadn't quite clicked into that. As far as interest rates on investments, we've assumed what we know at the moment, and it does tie back because Oliver and Sharon work closely on that, so there is a level of that. Economic forecasters are currently telling us one set of forecasters are suggesting we might have a rate cut this month. Other sets of forecasters are suggesting that it may still not come down as quickly as previously. So I'd have to rely on Sharon and Oliver to tell you the exact percentages for each of those elements. But we have tried to, wherever possible, we would tie those up together. We've not made one set of assumptions for Treasury management and one for the other, because clearly the two are interconnected, but it is 4% for wage inflation.
Just to add through you, Chair, on that particular point, remember last time round we were discussing, it was Q2, I think Councillor Martin asked the question about what did Oliver and myself think that the changes in the budget would mean to interest rates, and we thought, well, actually maybe they'll stay where they are for a little bit longer, and then the next day they got cut by 0.25%, but then have stayed higher than was predicted. So I think part of the problem is, again, it's that the budget is that best guess. It really is. And I think it's really important to understand that what we have is auditable assumptions that we have made in order to get there, such that if someone were to turn around in 6 months and say, was that a reasonable consideration? I think we have to be in a position that we can say, yes, here is an element of the logic behind it. But obviously, who knows what will actually happen in 3-6 months' time.
I get that, actually. I found the yield is about 5% at the moment when I read the report. Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think really on the interest rates, it was mainly looking at what's been achieved over the last 2 years, and then what's in the plan for next year. And I've got absolutely no problems with it being a prudent approach. But when you look at the Treasury report and the paid for advice, or the paid for example is saying that base rates are going to move from 4.75 down to 4 by the end of the year, that at first sight doesn't look consistent with almost, cutting what's likely to be our interest receipts in half from the actual outturn in this year into the budget next year. It looks like it's consistent with moving last year's budget down a fraction to this year's, or this year's budget to next year's budget. But it was just to know whether those were the interest rates that were built in, or were we using a more prudent, lower rate of return on our investments.
Perhaps Oliver can add some more colour to that in the next item. However, we need to be mindful of the fact that we will spend some capital as well, and we're looking all of that stuff as the Councillor Mecklenburgh said. It's all about we've got to think about the cash flow, where the money will be invested, and it is an art rather than science. You know that, Councillor Jennings, as well as I do. We may have been over-prudent, but in some respects I'd rather be over-prudent, particularly with all the things that we are, potentially facing over the next 12 months in terms of those vast unknowns. And we may be proved wrong. We all may be proved wrong, but and of course the overall yield on a Treasury portfolio will be different to the money that we keep in the bank as well. All of those things will be moving, and we've written Oliver will come to this, and flex within the Treasury Management Strategy. Not that we will do all of those things, but actually we need the ability to do that, and we need to think about that and think about that in line with what we might do on capital spend as well. So again, it's best known at this particular point in time. To me, and you're right, I came in October, so where some of the planning assumptions were already in place, but they don't feel out of kilter to me, and they don't feel uncomfortable. I think I'd be more reticent about something that thought we would stay at that level. We may be proven wrong, we may be overprudent, but I'd rather be on that side of the fence, being really honest with you.
Councillor Wells.
Yeah, I just had a question on the on the report in terms of the services and portfolios. I was doing a year-on-year comparison between last year's and this year's report, and I noticed that the naming of services and portfolios is substantially different from last year. So what I wondered was, is that just to represent a renaming, so to speak, or are there parts of services that have actually moved between one category and another? Do you understand what I'm driving at? Yeah, thank you.
Right. Thinking about it by head of service, clearly we've just gone through a restructure at that level, as you will be aware, and those heads of service broadly reflect where we will be for the new year, because clearly it's important that each of those heads of service knows where their budget responsibility is for the new financial year. The portfolios haven't changed that much, I don't believe, from last year, but it is about moving things to where they properly sit rather than anything unduly in the overall quantum of things. But certainly the head of service, we've tried to reflect what will be from the 1st of April for people managing their budgets. And being really honest, you reference the amount of time and work and effort, and it was much easier to do it at this point and present the budget in that fashion than it would have been to present the budget in this year's structures and then have to change it all before the 1st of April, when of course the team will be then very focused on doing all the activity for close down to produce the financial accounts. That's my honest answer.
Are there any other questions? Oh, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Chair. And going back to the provisional local government settlement that came out in December, did we put in a response to that? Because I note in the government's papers that only about 15% of county, district, boroughs, whatever we're classified as, only 15% responded to it. So I'd just be interested to find out whether we were one of those responses.
Through you, Chair, didn't do an individual response from Huntingdonshire. I sit on the executive of the Society of District Council Treasurers, and I contributed to that response. And it was a collective response from district councils, and I merely would have repeated it, and so it wouldn't have added any additional value. But I did have active contribution to that based on the conversations that we'd had in reviewing the settlement. So that was done in that fashion rather than individually.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll move on to item 6, which is Treasury Management. Welcome, Oliver.
Good evening. The paper that I'm introducing to you tonight is the Treasury Management Strategy, and also the associated strategies with it: capital strategy, investment strategy, minimum revenue provision calculation policy. The strategy is for the year 2025-26, and following the production of this strategy during next year, there will be various papers coming to you, as we know, quarterly about the activities that happen. The strategy is essentially a framework for us to work within for investing and borrowing. So there are things in there that we might not do, but it allows us to do those things if we need to at some point. The strategy for 25-6 is largely the same as 24-5. So I can assure members that there's nothing in there really that changes the strategy drastically from the previous year. I know there's a lot of updating to be done in the strategy, but the essentials of it are the same as last year's strategy. So if members remember last year for 24-5, we increased some of the the limits on some of the funds just to allow a bit more room if interest rates fell, so we'd have a bit more manoeuvrability. As we've just discussed, the interest rates haven't really fallen as quickly as we expected, so we haven't really used anything else other than at the moment the DMO and money market funds. So that's probably going to stay largely the same. The investment strategy covers some stuff that's listed in the commercial investment strategy, and that has been produced based on the current commercial investment strategy, rather than new one, which I know is in production at the moment. So the investment strategy is based on the old CIS, and also the MRP policy has been updated quite substantially because some new regulations have come in about how we can calculate our MRP. Now, as it stands at the moment, we only really use one option because we've got a fairly straightforward MRP calculation, but the others are there in case we need to do any different calculations. Maybe can I just add something on the interest rates that we were just discussing? The interest rates that are produced by Link they're forecast in the Bank of England rate, so we won't necessarily get the Bank of England rate on investment. So what I've judged, or what we judge, is what we might get on those DMO investments based on what the Bank of England interest rate might be at the time. So I think we probably discussed this before, but the problem that we've got at the moment is we don't know how the DMO rates are going to move based on what happens to the Bank of England rate, because we've got no history. The rates were sort of 0.1% or whatever until the last 2-3 years. So we are slightly lacking in data about what might happen when the Bank of England rate drops. Other factors come into play then with the DMO rate, so the rate that the government might offer for those investments. It can be policy, it can be other stuff that's going on in the world, not just the Bank of England rate. So yeah, they won't quite line up with what we've got there. And same goes for money market funds. We won't get the full 4.5% or whatever they're suggesting there. So there is a prudent approach taken on what we might get based on what we know from the recent past, and we haven't got a lot of history on it. So maybe we might have been more pessimistic than it might turn out, but we'll see. And we'll see what happens this week, because I think the rates are supposed to drop this week, aren't they?
Are there any questions on that? Can I just clarify? Obviously, Suzanne made reference to the commercial investment strategy. Just to confirm the timescales, thank you.
I'm not going to give you an absolute on that. I will reiterate what I said to the panel last time I spoke on that here, which is that we have deliberately focused on getting the budget done, and work is going on in the background. The SITFA who are leading on that work for us are now doing some of the work with service leads, and I've actually asked them also, in the light of local government review, to do some work to help us with that around making sure that we're clear about our assets and all the rest of it. And I think that's really quite important in the preparation of data that we will require. I believe the Executive Council has written out, and the intention is once we get through budget, as I committed to last time, there'll be some workshops rather than a working group of any particular panel. So there'll be some workshops taking place that will then lead to that development. My hope and intention is that during the first quarter of the year, we will get that back and we'll be able to debate and discuss it in, as Oliver says, the formation of what the commercial investment strategy looks like going forward. Clearly, when we set off on that route and commissioned the work, we didn't see local government review, and therefore that will obviously there will be some impact in that thinking, I suspect, that we'll all have to bring into that. So my intention is Q1, but again, we need to measure that with what we need to achieve for local government review in terms of understanding our assets as well. So that's, again, my current view of the matter.
Thank you for your honesty in that. I want to take this opportunity, I'm sure I'll speak for the rest of the the committee. We fully appreciate the challenges all kinds of staff are actually having to deal with the additional extra work, and we were trying not to put too much on you, but I want to thank you and all your staff for all the extra work you're putting in. Are there any other questions? No. Thank you both for your time, and in light of that, I want to close the meeting. Thank you.